do that in a second. But to be able to, and I'll also get into how they did it, because one of the guys that pretty much designed that Ray Santilli kind of eked out, designed this alien and built this alien, came on another podcast about a year or so ago called Astonishing Legends. People listen to this show. Most of y'all have heard as Astonishing Legends. Yeah. They have a bigger listening audience than I will ever dream of. And the guy that designed it went through it step by step, how he built it and how Ray Santilli he conned him. But let's start off with, this is footage from a dead alien that crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. Let's start with that, because you start with that one, just with that one, everything else is bullshit. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to go rehash the whole Roswell story, because if you can listen to everyone's done it. I've done the episode. If you want to go back and listen to me and my other co-host Ogul discuss the Roswell incident, what we think had happened, you can listen to it after this podcast. It's everywhere. But I'll give you a brief summary. Supposedly a craft of unknown origin crash landed outside of Roswell, New Mexico in July of 1947. A farmhand had discovered it, let the Army Air Force Base, which was out of Roswell, New Mexico, which is important Army Air Force Base because that's where the Enola Gay was stationed before it dropped the bomb. After it dropped the bomb on Hiroshima in the United States war against Japan in 1945. It was important Army Air Force Base. This guy tells the sheriff, he lets the Air Force Base know. They go out there and start collecting the debris. First, they reported that they had captured an unidentified flying object, and then like a day or so later, they were like, nope, it's a weather balloon. And the story pretty much died right then and there.
I mean, it has something to do too. Didn't they say it has something to do with some type of military?
It was pretty much their first reported that the army was in possession of an unidentified flying object, because this is right after Kenneth Arnold had pretty much ushered in the modern UFO craze, which we know today. After Kenneth Arnold had said he saw 6 flying discs in Washington State, they had said they had captured a flying saucer. And then someone got in their ear and said, no, it's not a goddamn flying saucer, it's a goddamn weather balloon. The debris of a weather balloon. The weather balloon, and it came out, it had Major Jesse Marceau to spray the debris. They said, no, it's not a UFO, it was just a weather balloon. So that's when the story had pretty much died until around 1978, when researcher Stanton Freeman interviewed Jesse Marceau.
And like Jesse Marceau, 50 years. Or not 50. Yeah. That's like a good 30 years.
30 some odd years, almost 40 years. He said, no, there wasn't a weather balloon. There was a UFO crash land on that area. So Jesse Marceau tells the story that pretty much it was sworn to secrecy. Stanton Freeman takes Jesse Marceau's story, gives it to a couple of writers. They write the Roswell incident, and pretty much it blows the hell up. It starts blowing up. Now,
and the Air Force changed the story in 94.
Yeah, they changed the story in 94 because of all the conspiracy theories that were going out there. First, they said it was a high-tech balloon to listen to, that they sent in the air to listen to nuclear testing that the Soviets might have been doing. They were taking these high-powered, high-altitude balloons, putting microphones on them, and sending them over to listen to see if the Soviets were testing atomic bombs. That wasn't good enough.
They said, damn it, we saw.
Yeah, because it like
an alien.
Yeah, it was not only like like the conspiracy theories, like they're lying. There was holes in what the U.S. government had put in that story. Those types of balloons, yes, they were using those type of balloons, but those balloons won't be used until the 1950s.
Yeah,
it wasn't being used in the late 40s.
Liars.
So that was a lie, and people and all of that started to say that they were really out of nowhere. Started to say there was alien bodies that were also recovered.
It's a lot.
So the government was like, came up with like, no, this is what really happened, and they said that they were testing these high altitude balloons again and dropping dummies off of them to see how
people would react,
how a person will react from being dropped from a high altitude. So they can't use a person, so they use dummies, and that was what had crash land.
Can we kill them? Do we need
yes.
to drop them higher?
We need to drop them higher. Can we get them to space and then drop them? So, and it was like, okay, and that was like the last the U.S. government had said about, like, this is case closed, and a lot of skeptics like, oh, that's there. There's a huge problem with that and the alien bodies problem.
Gosh.
So let's talk about the dummy problem.
If you can do it right.
Yes, they were testing high altitude drops and seeing how the human body would react. But here's the problem. They weren't doing it until the 60s, and it wasn't the Army. It was the Air Force. The Air Force didn't come up their own branch until 1950s. I don't have the exact date.
Right.
The Air Force wasn't its own branch. It was the Army, Air Force, and the Navy had their thing, and
the Marines.
And the Marines are officially part of the Navy. So there was no separate Air Force. They split, and the Air Force became its own branch. And those are the ones that were testing high altitude dummies and drops. And that was in the 60s, late 50s, around 59, 60. Not 1947. That throws off that. But the major part that throws off the UFO bodies is that, and not a lot of people remember this, Jesse Marceau did not mention alien bodies. The witnesses, they said they seen debris until that had spoken from when after Jesse Marceau had told his story. And people started coming up that were around that area, started speaking. And even like before, when they first discovered the wreckage, no one had mentioned any bodies at all. No one had mentioned any dead alien bodies. You know when the alien bodies started coming up?
Was it the 90s?
You're close. 1989.
Oh,
and I'll tell you exactly.
Real close.
1989. And I'll tell you the exact date it started coming up.
Okay.
September 20th, 1989.
What happened on that day?
That date was a re-airing of the Roswell segment on Unsolved Mysteries.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, I mentioned it before in the episode, but I didn't go in exacts. But pretty much, Unsolved Mysteries had aired a re-airing of the Roswell incident on that show. They did it earlier in the previous season. Okay. So after that episode had aired, they received a call from a Barney Burnett. That's the person's name. Okay. That gave the operators that were taking calls for Unsolved Mysteries.
Okay.
Barney had included a couple of secondhand stories saying that Barney had seen captured alien bodies by the Army. No, excuse me. It wasn't Barney. It was Glenn Dennis. Yes, he was a No, it was Barney. I'm sorry.
It was, but come on, man.
Yeah, it was Barney, but he had stated that he was stationed on at the Roswell base, and well, stationed around it, and that he was dating a young nurse at the time.
Okay.
And this young nurse had told him a story. They were telling him a story about how she received a phone call the day after they discovered pretty much the day they discovered the wreckage, asking because she was working at the Army Air Force Hospital on the Roswell base. Do they have small child-sized caskets?
Oh gosh, that's a lot.
So she was like, "Huh? I don't think so." So she calls over to a mortuary, the local mortuary, outside of town. And they ask, "You have a small child-sized coffins?" She refers the person that's calling to. She said was a high-ranking official on the base to mortuarian outside. Now there's in the town. Now an army base is pretty much a self-sufficient city, almost a self-sufficient city. They have everything. They have restaurants, even back then in the 40s, restaurants, you name it. Also, they have mortuarians and all that. They also have mortuaries.
Okay.
So there's really no kids living on the base at the time, from what I've found. If there's any, they're living outside the town. But it's pretty weird that they didn't have any caskets that size, but the mortuarian did. So she was working. So it's later on that day.
Probably, there's nobody in the military that's that size. There's no reason they would have it regularly, but they would get it probably themselves from the mortuary, right?
Yes, and pretty much later on that day, she says, the MPs and a couple of Army officials and a bunch of people that came into the hospital with 3 body bags. Right. And they hurry up and they usher the body bags into a room, pretty much seals off the room. No one can get in there. So she takes a look in there. She's happy to take a look in there, and she sees this small body. Kind of, as she described it, looked like a child.
Which you would remember, because that's sad.
Yes, that is sad. And pretty much she's hurried up and ushered out of the room and said, like, you pretty much by one of the MPs, you didn't see anything. You are not to speak of what you saw.
Because the government's real good about just letting people go.
Pretty much. But she's also
a private business.
Yeah, but also she's part of the Army. So if she's given an order. So you're not going to disobey the order, but she's telling this guy, Barney. Pretty much, and after that, after she tells the story, which is a couple of days after it had happened, she is reassigned to a military base near Antarctica.
Oh God!
From what Barney had said.
Oh my God!
And so, and he never sees her again. Never hears from her. Never sees her again.
They got her.
Yeah, but there's a lot of problems with this story.
They got her.
Barney gives the name. He gave the name of the nurse that he was seeing at the time, and there's no records of her on the base anywhere.
They snatched him.
Yeah, they snatched her. Also, this is the first time anyone has ever said they had come across any bodies. Before this, it was just crash and debris. And people handling debris. Like Jesse Marceau's son says that he handled some of the debris himself, but no one ever mentions any bodies. All of a sudden, this story comes up. Now everyone's mentioning bodies.
Okay.
Also, another problem is this Barney Barnett guy is not his real name. Supposedly, this guy is a prankster and decided to call in Unsolved Mysteries to come fuck with the people in Unsolved Mysteries. But yet, that story, they take it,